Every day we're moving in ways that require spinal rotation, meaning we're twisting and turning, picking up objects, moving them, putting them down. And yet calisthenics, aka bodyweight exercise, doesn't really involve a whole lot of this spinal rotation. Most of the exercises are in a plane of movement called the sagittal plane. Sagittal plane is the plane of movement where you're moving back to front. That's one way to think about it. A good example of this is lunges. If you watch someone doing lunges, they are moving back to front, front to back. Perfect example of sagittal plane movement. But then when you look at all the other basic calisthenics, they're all sagittal plane as well, including push-ups and pull-ups, even squats and leg raises. These all fall into sagittal plane. And even when you go beyond the basics, you start getting into levers and things like that, also sagittal plane movement. Now, that isn't necessarily a bad thing, but you also want to include the other two planes of movement as well. And really quick, let me explain those. First is the frontal plane of movement, which means if you're looking at someone face on, it would be side to side movement. That's frontal plane movement. A great example of this, very common, being the jumping jack. Jumping jacks are frontal plane movement. And also any kind of side lunge or archer squat, that's another good example in calisthenics of frontal plane. But when it comes to spinal rotation, that's the transverse plane of movement, when you're rotating side to side. And unfortunately, not a lot of bodyweight exercises really use it, except for specific ab exercises like bicycle crunches and certain types of leg raises. So I'm making this video to really quick explain how you can start adding more spinal rotation into your routine, if you're not already. And before I explain all the 4 primary movement patterns and how you can add spinal rotation to them, I first want to explain really quick that when I say cervical rotation of the spine, I'm referring to the neck. So turning your head side to side, basically, that is cervical spinal rotation. When I say thoracic spinal rotation, I'm talking about the torso. All right, when you turn at the torso, that is thoracic. And then lumbar spinal rotation is when you turn at the hips. That's going to be moving the lower back, the bottom part of your spine. Let's start with pulling exercises. And when we talk about pulling exercises, I want to talk about rows, specifically one-armed rows. When you do a one-armed row, you're going to find that naturally your body externally rotates at the bottom of the movement. And as you come up and ascend, you're going to internally rotate up to the top. It's also your entire spine, the cervical, the thoracic, and the lumbar, that's rotating throughout the movement. So this is a great one to start with. And what I love about one-armed rows is that your feet are still on the floor, so you can use your legs for assistance, making this very approachable for anyone who's beyond complete beginner. By the way, for those of you who always ask, hey, what's that bar that you're using? That is the base bar, the original base bar by Base Blocks. And if you're in the market for one, I just want to mention I have a discount code -10, so you can get 10% off. It's actually for anything in the originals line at their shop. I'll put a link down below if you want to check it out. But everybody always asks that, so I just want to throw it out there in case you're in the market for a bar. Now, although I do not recommend trying to rotate your spine during a pull-up, you can hang from a bar and you can do spinal rotation in the hanging position. When you rotate at the hips like this, it's going to focus on lumbar rotation. And being in an L-sit position makes it really challenging. So you can tuck the legs if you want to make it easier, but for some of you, this might be way too challenging. So another variation, and this is moving on to the hinge category of movement, is to do lying windshield wipers on the floor. So you would start off with a straight leg raise lying on the floor, and then let your legs drop to one side very slowly. And then you want to raise them back up to center and then let them drop slowly to the other side and just keep alternating sides. These lying windshield wipers are great. A lot of people do windshield wipers on a bar, so they hang from a bar in a tucked front lever and they can do windshield wipers that way. But these ones on the floor are great for beginners. If they feel too hard, you can always tuck the legs to make them easier, but I recommend starting with these for sure. Now, what about the push-up category? Well, we're gonna stick with the basic push-up, but what you're gonna do is at the top of a push-up, you're going to rotate your spine coming up onto one arm and then unfurl the other arm directly above the shoulder. And then you're going to bring it back to the starting position and perform another push-up, alternating sides per rep. This is another movement that rotates the entire spine, cervical, thoracic, and lumbar. And what's great about it is that it's slowing down the push-up to make it a lot harder. And that part where you're on one arm is going to build a lot of core strength and stability because you're basically doing a one-arm plank. So it's a fantastic exercise. And last but not least is the squat category. Now there's tons of rotation of the spine in deep squat mobility exercises. There are entire videos about that if you want to check those out. But what I recommend starting with, if you're a beginner, is perform a squat, and then at the top of the squat, go ahead and rotate your torso to one side, and then perform another squat, and then rotate to the other side, and just alternate on each. When you do these, you might feel a nice stretch in the hip flexors of the side you're rotating away from, but mainly this is going to work your obliques, as does pretty much all of the spinal rotation movements I've mentioned in this video. They're going to work the oblique abs, which is something that doesn't get a whole lot of work unless you specifically focus on it. You can also add thoracic rotation at the bottom of lunges, and you can get creative with a lot of different leg exercises, but I think I got the point across now, right? Hopefully you see that in all four of the primary movement patterns, you can add spinal rotation, and this is something that you really have to focus on and consciously add to your workouts, because most basic and even advanced bodyweight exercises just don't incorporate a lot of this movement, even though it's highly functional, or it's going to benefit you in many ways every day. You're moving, rotating your spine. It's just a normal thing that we do every day, and yet a lot of fitness doesn't really incorporate it. So hopefully you found this video helpful. If you did, please hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to stay tuned and learn more from me. And with that said, I'll see you in the next video.